Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this second panel dealing with diversity in the context of our common humanity. In 1948, the newly founded United Nations adopted a remarkable document called the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And it was unanimously adopted, and it strengthened the declaration by creating legal instruments that, like the Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Covenant for Political and Civil Rights, and then conventions for the protection of against discrimination against women. And even by the end of the century, we had a special convention for the rights of the child. And by doing so, we have really highlighted very much the commitment that we all feel, and that all nations, in fact, have actually formally committed to, in terms of accepting our common humanity and the idea of human rights being something that is not granted by a government or by a power, but that you possess simply by virtue of being human. And this is truly one of the great inventions of the second half of the 20th century that brought us to this century, where we went a step further and established common principles. First, the Millennium Development Goals that carried us from 2000 to 2015, and then the Sustainable Development Goals that were to take us from 2015 to 2030. And yet, despite that, we can see some serious areas of concern. In 2020, the UN recorded the largest number of refugees and internally displaced persons since the end of the Second World War. Now, that gives us a moment to reflect, what happened, that they were ousted from their homes and their families and to be where they are. We know that even a very limited number of people crossing boundaries created fantastic crises in Europe. In 2015, about 1 million refugees, mostly coming from Syria at the time, some more coming from Africa in the Sahel, but mostly coming from Syria at the time, created a political issue in Europe. After much effort was made to lower the barriers between people, have a Schengen area where with free movement of people was one of the great gains of the EU, barriers started going up again. Secondly, in practically every country in the Western world, there is a serious issue about immigration. And again, the notion that you are different than me, and therefore you may or may not have the right to come and live as my neighbor, became a serious issue in many parts of the world, including the United States, of course, where we see this happening in a very big way. Then there is also the fact that as a result of the growing communications across the world, and as a result of the growing mobility and the movements of populations and so on, the issue of multiculturalism has come to the fore again. Now, a long time ago, and here we looked to Europe, and we are presently sitting here in Europe, we looked to Europe as the place that recognized that cultural diversity was a source of richness. And despite that, it has been a divisive political issue in most countries, and this richness needs to be captured and recognized in a way that enables this variety of people to live together in a truly mutually reinforcing fashion. And then finally, there is a question that why is it that we have such a problem of so-called minorities? I would submit that contrary to what people normally say in history books that in 1648, the treaties of Westphalia did not create the national state. It created the sovereign state. To the extent that I can say there is an Arab nation, well, it encompasses 22 Arab political sovereign states that are members of the Arab League. You can talk about the German nation that involves parts of Germany and of Austria and bits of Switzerland as well. But what you had was the sovereign state, which had boundaries, which had a government that was in control, that controlled and could enforce its will on the population within these boundaries, and that could enter into agreements with others. However, practically every country of those sovereign states tried to turn itself into a nation state. And by having a historical narrative, by having a national anthem, by having official, sometimes religion, official language, etc. And instantaneously, they all created the problems of minorities. When you've tried to have, because there's hardly any of those sovereign states that happen to just exactly coincide with the boundaries of a national entity. So we've had this, and minorities have been, yes, enriching on one level, but on another level, they've also been used as scapegoats and as victims of discrimination in many instances and examples. So as we look to the world today, we do expect there will be more mobility in the future, especially from poorer countries to richer countries, especially since there is a demographic transition where most of the countries of the world are aging, all the populations are aging, and that therefore younger migrants will find their way into many parts of the world today. And thus the kinds of issues I've just discussed become serious issues. Can we hope, therefore, for finding ways by which the potential richness of this diversity is captured and enhanced, and the potential problems are diminished and excised? That is what this panel is all about. And I am very honored to start off with someone who has as a primary responsibility today for the United Nations to deal with how to make alliance between civilizations and not a clash between civilizations. And I am talking about Mr. Miguel Ángel Moratinos, who is the High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations, and who I believe is ready to join us now. Mr. Moratinos.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ismail. I think you listen to me, you hear me. I just arrived from New York to Madrid. I gone 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 to Madrid, 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 I gone. Madrid, ayúdame que 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 Madrid.
culture is not anymore absent in security policy, and culture contributes to the global economy. The successes of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development does not only depend on government, but also the efforts of civil society by the public at large and artists. Of all the tools at our disposal to help govern our world, only a few are considered forms of art. Diplomacy is one of these powerful tools as it continually evolves, taking new shapes and forms to open paths through which we can find creative approaches to bring people and countries closer together. I'm an artist. My own perception of the world is tied inextricably to art. When I consider the idea of intercultural dialogue as an artist, it necessarily connects to me as an individual through the prism of art as I reach out to create bridges of communication with other artists and individuals. The process of connecting through art is at once a deeply personal and powerful shared experience. This exchange of different cultures, perception, and visions, I believe that on an interpersonal level, it is possible to build peace through art, and I have devoted myself to helping lay the foundation to move us towards this goal. The idea of soft power through cultural diplomacy has helped define how tools such as the arts, education, sports, music, dance, and intercultural exchanges can be used as tools in a nation's foreign policy. In the context of international exchanges, UNESCO's work has long been at the forefront of these efforts. Art helps us to make sense of the world and help us cope with its often hard and unforgiving edges. As the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw told us, without art, the crudeness of reality would make the world unbearable. Art transmits values and messages that come from the soul of each artist. UNESCO's work within the United Nations system aims to build bridges between people and countries through exchanges of expression in culture, science, and education. This exceptional UNESCO initiative intends to bring into reality the organization mandate to build peace through art. Culture is a set of values and practices that create meaning for society. For me, the use of art to transmit values and messages is something that comes from the soul of each artist. Today, I would like to talk to you about few projects that I'm working on, each of which I hope is designed to further our shared goal of building pieces through art. First, of course, there is Art Camp, which I'm very honored to be the godmother since 2012. The concept of Art Camp is a simple one. It is a true example of culture diplomacy. It brings together artists from different nations and cultures, especially those who come from countries in conflict, to work on art projects in order to create person connection and build opportunity for exchanges of ideas and building bridges for peace. In the work of building peace has to be taken one by one. We have at least started in building peace through art. I like to remember the words of the American writer Albert Hubbard, who said, "The art is not a thing, it is a way." As an artist, the language I use is bronze. My philosophy is that art is a tool for peace, working to build a better world. My art has always been an important motivation, and my sculpture, The Tree of Peace, is a symbol representing this goal. By touching these bronze sculptures, we can feel the weight of history and shape the future, where art plays a role in the virtuous path of peace and diplomacy. The Tree of Peace sculpture has been inaugurated at universities and other public places around the world, calling to our conscience in places where people can come together, providing an opportunity for men and women to reflect and talk about peace, making it part of our daily dialogue. For I believe it is only through personal contact that we can truly come to learn about and respect each other as individuals. Finally, since this year, I became associated to international French-speaking artistic and cultural education program, Odyssey, which aims to make children in schools around the world aware of richness of their local heritage by encouraging them to become active ambassadors. The Tree of Peace is one of the artistic educational resources in this program. The work is placed at the center of this process as a vector of universal dialogue. Launched in 2012, Odyssey now has more than 60 classes across 20 French-speaking countries. Each time it is greeted with enthusiasm by the students and the teachers. If my art can help in any way to construct the shared values of tolerance, mutual understanding, respect, and dialogue that are the foundation of UNESCO's work, then I shall take some satisfaction that my effort as an artist have allowed me to make a small contribution. To conclude, I really believe that art can be a major element that we can all use to help cultural diplomacy in our world and to promote the exchanges and understanding between people. The human mind is a whole, culture is interrelated to development, and both are necessary to foster a culture of peace and tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now told by our colleagues, both in IT and my much beloved Ilaha from the NGIC, also been working with them, and that we are now back in connection with all our colleagues. I hope we can still catch Mr. Moratinos because he had another engagement. So if we can have, please, a Mr. Moratinos.
Yes, thank you, Ismail. I think now you could listen and see me. It's a great satisfaction. I mean, I have a special reluctance to this webinar, this technological challenge, and I was much better in New York 2 weeks ago with all of you in person, and I really invite the people who are in Geneva and join this important and timely debate. So we have lost a lot of time. Let me try to be a little concrete and put some element on this important change. Well, in New York, we talk about what means peace and stability in the 21st century. Here in Geneva, you have chosen the center of Nizami, Ganjavi, that I really appreciate the work and the engagement and the leadership of this kind of conversation and exchanges between ourselves on the very, very, I think, timely issue of peace and diversity and the common humanity. And I think you have chosen this subject thinking of me, because who better than the United Nations Alive Civilization to talk about multiculturalism, cultural diversity, and human rights, what you have defined in certain moment like kind of soft diplomacy or soft security issue. We just changed our views after you had a first panel that was more dedicated to hardcore security issues, and come now with what they call soft. It doesn't mean being soft is not more important. On the contrary, I think in this today's world, the soft element, the soft reality are stronger than the so-called hardcore security challenges. So let me start by recalling what I already said in New York very briefly, but it's a kind of mantra from my organization, from myself. I think we all are very much concerned, very much mobilized, very much committed to save the planet. But I think the most important challenge we all have is to save humanity. And when we put the priority in the human beings, in humanity, of course, the so-called soft action, soft diplomacy, soft security issue are the most important ones. So I think nobody will deny that we live in a multicultural world. I think it's something obvious. There is, of course, a series of theories, of analysis, of approaches, and that, of course, there has been a cycle of civilization, that the one prevails of the other. But at the end of the day, in the 21st century, we can come to a very clear conclusion. There are no superior civilization over the other. All civilizations have contributed to the progress and advancement of humankind. And we have really to take stock of what each of these civilizations has contributed to the whole humanity. And I think if we agree about that, if we agree that today there is not a kind of supremacy civilization, that what some analysis say that, of course, the Western civilization will be the last one, and that will be the end of history, that has been proved wrong. And we have to come with a very clear sense of we live in a world there is many cultures, many religions, and many civilizations. As you will recall, at the dinner you offered us in New York, I quote President Charles de Gaulle mentioning the great Minister of Culture of France, André Malraux. But today I will not quote de Gaulle, I will quote André Malraux. And you probably remember that Malraux said that the 20th century would be cultural, will it not be? Well, I will say myself that the 21st century will be multicultural, or will not it be? So I think that have to be absolutely acknowledged. And it's a fact. We are in a multicultural world, and we are in a multiculturalism society. And whoever can deny that any city of today, any country, any nation have this component of different culture, different religions. Either in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, all cities have been multicultural. So, while Mrs. Hell just, the lady who took the floor before me, I was listening to her, Mrs. Serre said about art. There is a fantastic book of a French writer, Mathias Hénard, called Compass, La Boussole, where he reflects how East and West has been influenced itself. Even the Baroque music of the Mozart, of the great composer of Middle Europe, has been influenced by the Eastern music. So this melting point of ideas, experiences, tradition, legacies are being beneficial for humankind. But let me also be expressing certain concern, because in certain countries, and I have not to hide, even in France, there is a kind of rejection of this concept of multiculturalism. They agree about cultural diversity. That's that, of course, we have to protect, we have to develop, but they don't like and then reject the term multiculturalism. I will not reject multiculturalism because I think it's a fact. It's like a globalization. The question how we promote multiculturalism. And I think there is a fear in certain sector of the, let's say, establishment of the elite, the cultural elite in France and other European countries that are concerned and worry about relativism. Because if we accept multiculturalism, that will mean that we are decreasing our values, our, let's say, set of principles, and that will undermine our own culture and civilization. I think that is a wrong approach. I think we have to fight for cultural diversity. At the same time, we have to really recognize that there is a clear need for reinforcing multiculturalism. And that's one of the initiatives I mentioned in New York of the government of Azerbaijan, that they are, of course, working for the culture of peace, but they have promoted a new initiative called Peace for Culture. Because in this complex world, of course, we need a peace, we need a stability in order that we can bring about with certain cultural event and action a better follow-up of the whole situation in different regions of the world. So my third comment is about the human rights, and you mentioned in the introductory remark, Ismail, it's an important element that it takes part of the common agenda. We should introduce them in this soft diplomacy policy in order to really protect and safeguard humanity. And I think there is no any contradiction to really stand stronger and absolutely defending them at all levels in order that we can defend this universal value for the next century. But we are coming close, we are approaching the 75th anniversary of the adoption of this fantastic Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And we will be tempted to really open up and to include some of the rights that were not included in 48. There will be a tendency to introduce climate change. There will be a tendency to introduce a neuro right of new technology, in order that we can protect our intimacy and privacy with the new technology that are being taking place in the whole world. There will be interest really to adapt the new human rights context to the 21st century. But I think it will be very, very difficult and very, very, I think we have to be extremely prudent and precautious in order not to open up and then coming up with a negative new declaration that will be less important and less committed as the one in 1948. So maybe we can imagine to have some protocols. Maybe we have to really adopt some new element that add to what already the 30 articles that are perfect. If you go back and you read the 30 article of the Human Rights Universal Declaration, you will be astonished how the people who wrote this fantastic declaration have in their mind the comprehensiveness of what means human rights today. And finally, I want to really mention the connection between, of course, humanity, human rights, multiculturalism, cultural diversity with the Agenda 2030. Unfortunately, to be frank with all of you, if we look to the 17 SDG, yes, 16, objective 16, they talk about peaceful institutions, social inclusion. He touched in a certain way this kind of elements of our agenda of today, but not really in the right and important manner. There is not a cultural SDG. There has not been, really, I don't know how, I know how difficult was the negotiation, but it's something missing. That these elements of cultural diversity in a proper manner was not mentioned in the common agenda, in the agenda of 2030. So I have an idea, I have a new concept which should try to defend and in order to get out of this misunderstanding between multiculturalism and cultural diversity we have biodiversity. Biodiversity is well accepted. It's about the life of the plants, of human beings, of animals. Why we don't have a cult diversity? Cult diversity that includes cult, the places of cult and cultural, and a single word. And we'll have an element to introduce and to support all these issues that we are discussing today. A final point, and I stop here, is about the title of this discussion about a common humanity. It's common, but I will prefer to defend our motto, the motto of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, that is one humanity and many cultures and many religions. We have one humanity, not a common humanity. We have only one, and we have to preserve that humanity. That's our main goal. And I think the United Nations Alliance of Civilization is going to continue. We will be very soon in November in Geneva. We will have a very important first concert of One Humanity campaign, and all of you will be invited to attend this concert in the room 20 on the 8th of November of 2021. So thank you very much to give me the floor, and thank you very much to the technician that finally they could arrange this technological problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. It's great to hear from you as usual. And it would be very interesting to see how, as we defended biodiversity, we can also defend cultural diversity. And as you say, we are coming close to the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration. But like you, I want not to touch too much the Universal Declaration. It is a remarkably successful document. It is a document that has profoundly affected humanity. Almost no place in the world that you can go to where people don't speak of human rights. And from what seemed at the time to be a very idealistic declaration pushed by Eleanor Roosevelt and others. So yes, we shall look into that. My colleagues, I want to make sure, can we reach His Excellency, Mr. Joseph Muscat, Prime Minister of Malta?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful, Mr. Prime Minister.
Unfortunately, I'm driving, so since the technical problem, I had to start driving because I'm picking up my daughter from school. So that's a very important task I have today.
But please go ahead with, give us the benefit of a few nuggets from you, sir.
So thank you. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for this invitation. I will not delve on the philosophical part of the issues at stake. I believe I really enjoyed myself listening to the
Colleagues, look at the sound, please.
We could listen to. I limit myself to the political issues when facing a migration crisis. Years or so that I've been Prime Minister of my country, which happens to be in the center of one of the biggest migration routes in the world, that is the Central Mediterranean, when it comes obviously to this part of the world. The key takeaway for me was that during my tenure, but I also believe it's the case of my predecessors and successors, a global issue is all the time being matched up with a national response. And there is very, very few opportunities to have a more multinational response to migration. I say this with a heavy heart, as in I am a proud supporter of the European Union. I believe that the European Union is one of the most fantastic political projects and human projects over the past century or so. Nevertheless, we have failed miserably when it comes to handling migration. And to be very frank, for us and for me personally, migration is not a problem. It's not a problem in the sense that we need migrants in order to fulfill our shortcomings. A substantial part of that shortcoming being the human power, the labor force shortcoming. When I say this, I would not want to relegate issues relating to human beings as one of commercial interaction or transactions, of looking at them as just a human resource, not at all. But I would want to make that point. The second point is that integration, which has fast become one of the least used words in many Western politicians' vocabulary. Integration cannot be one way too. Integration needs to be seen as a learning curve for both the host and the guest, which will then transform the host and guest as one. The guest will no longer be the guest, and the host will welcome another part of the community within their premises. Let's put it that way. The third point is that populism, let's call it that way. I prefer calling it extremism, because I don't feel there is anything wrong with being popular with the people. But extremism is a monster that once one starts feeding into it, that monster always wants more and is never satisfied. So I must say that even when myself, I had issues in managing migration flows, and I would say things that would be then taken over by extremists as it being seen as a nod to them, that proved to be very politically costly and very socially costly in the medium to long term. So those are my 3 points. I wouldn't want to take more of your time given the delay. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you for these 3 points and your notation on populism and extremism, and as well as integration and so on. Thank you, sir, for these intervention, and our greetings to your daughter. Let me now move to the next speaker, Mr. Abdulaziz Altwaijri, who is the head of ICESCO, former head of ICESCO. I understand that he is connected to us. Can we? Mr. Abdulaziz Altwaijri, is he there? Can we connect?
Do you hear me?
There he is. Marhaba. Please go right ahead.
My dear friend, Dr. Ismail, how are you? And I greet you and all the honorable participants. I missed most of the speeches at the beginning because there was a technical problem, but finally I caught up with you. I thank the organizers and I thank you personally, and thank all the friends who are present here and who are also speaking online. This issue is very important, and it comes at a time where the world is facing many problems that threaten peace and security in the world. And this issue is very related to this reality. Cultural diversity, religious diversity, lingual diversity, and ethnic diversity are all realities that we live with, and they existed since the creation of this universe, and they will stay until the end of life. The problem is that how we manage to solve the problems that arise when we meet and coexist and deal with each other. The problem is that many times we do not refer to the principles that religions came with, and the principles that were stipulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many other conventions, that people should respect the diversity, should respect the differences, and deal with each other on this basis. If we plant this in the minds and the hearts of the young generations, in the schools, in the media, in the cultural forums, in the religious speeches everywhere, I think this will create a new understanding of respect and acceptance of these diversities. The world is now in turmoil. There are many wars, hatred, and phobias, and many conflicts that threaten peace and security. And migration is part of that, because it is a result of the wars in a big part of it. Because those who immigrate and go to other countries, they seek refuge and try to find a safe or a safer place to live in and a better life to have. They do not go there because they don't like their countries. They love their countries and they love their people and they love their culture, but they were forced to do that because war is there in their countries. If we find solutions for the wars, immigration will be reduced to a very minimal level. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights speaks about the one nation, the one ummah, the one people. It doesn't differentiate between white and black and yellow and green and whatever. All the creation of God are good and beautiful. They are equal in front of God and in front of law. So we created these differences because of our prejudices and of our racism sometimes, and because of our greed in dealing with each other. And I think UNESCO had played a great role, and ICESCO also was a partner in that. I remember when I was Director General of ICESCO, we had a very strong cooperation program with UNESCO at the time of Federico Mayor, Matsora, and also Irina Bokova, and now with Madame I am really very sorry because I'm working with her now because I'm out of ICESCO, but I hope that ICESCO will continue to cooperate with UNESCO on those fields, because these two organizations work in very important fields and domains: education, science, culture, and communication, and they can create new understanding and new peaceful coexistence among nations and peoples of the world. We also worked with UNESCO in the creation or development of the International Declaration on Cultural Diversity, and ICESCO also made its own declaration for the Islamic world, and it was adopted in the Ministers of Cultures meeting in Algeria in 2004. And to strengthen the values of cultural diversity and acceptance of these realities, and try to make them as forces for development, for advancement, for coexistence among peoples and nations. And this could be done through these areas, especially with the existence of two big organizations. One is globally working, and the second one is in the Islamic world, where many problems come from. Now, the wars that are erupting, unfortunately, are in Islamic countries, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in some other places, in Libya. So I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I am really very, very, very happy to see that the UN and the Nizami Ganjavi International Center are taking the lead in presenting this issue in the office of the United Nations in Geneva. And this shows that we can work together, if we will, to help the leaders of the world find their ways in solving the problems that are hurting humanity and also causing a lot of agony and disparity for many people all over the globe. Migration, as I said, can be solved. It is not a threat. It is a result of a problem. And if we solve that problem, we can also reduce the threat and the problems of migration. Finally, the religions in the world, especially the divine religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all talked about the oneness of the creation. So the people of the world today are the offspring of the old people who are equal when they were created. And there are no differences between them in terms of their dignity and in terms of their humanity. So I really second what my dear friend, Mr. Moratinos, has just said, that it is not common world, but it is one world. We are one world, yes. Commonalities, brings, similarities and differences, but one world means that there are no differences and we cannot equate it to anything else, but it is a unit that exists by itself, and that it indicates and reflects the reality that the people of the world are one people. There are no differences between them in their dignity and their creation, and they should work and behave and coexist according to this discipline and to this idea that is coming from the religions and coming from the Universal Declarations of Human Rights. And I thank you again and wish you all the best.
It's great to hear from you. We still have time and we have two more speakers, and let me now turn to Mr. Paul Révay, former European Director of the Trilateral Commission. I hope we are well connected. Mr. Paul Révay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes,
Thank you very much, Dr. Serageldin, and thank you very much for the invitation, likewise to NGIC. It's a great pleasure to be back. Just a few words, if I may, concerning the subjects at hand. I looked at the program and I saw that you wished also to address refugee and migration issues. And I would like to say a few words from a European perspective on this issue for the panel. First of all, well, as you are all aware, Europe did adopt last September a new pact on migration and asylum, proposing a fresh start on migration issues and building confidence through more effective procedures, such as striking a new balance between responsibility and solidarity. One item which came up heavily in this program, in this new pact, which you have all seen, is this idea of more effective, strengthening of return procedures, and also, let's be honest, of border security. And that is why it was very much criticized as having more sort of a policing effect on the entire migration issue which Europe is facing. But I would like to say a few words on this aspect, all the more so as our dear Ambassador Moratinos just mentioned that cultural diversity was not mentioned in the original SDGs. Well, the same applies amazingly to refugees, which were not mentioned in the original Sustainable Development Goals, since there has been a little bit of applicability in the way that refugees are now considered to be addressed in percentages of populations in the member countries, but still, it was not at the forefront of the original Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to address this lack of focus, which, to be honest, is highlighted each year and again recently by UNHCR, which brought out its Global Compact and its global annual report on these issues. Now, how do we go about it from a European perspective? we need to find obviously durable solutions, and with roughly 80 million plus refugees in the world, it is a pressing challenge. And here, one item has not been underlined there again, and it's the issue of refugee return and reintegration. In the light of the political issues that the Northern Hemisphere is witnessing, let's be honest, against these migratory flows, there's a lot of political discussion. How do we make and ensure that return is applicable? But that would also imply, how do we help in reintegration of refugees who will or are being returned, although at a very small percentage rate. So lots of challenges are ahead, and we need to try and find a durable solution as to avoid that our political discourse, especially in Western Europe, but also in Central Europe, how to say, is not blandished by this issue. So we need to find ways and means to maintain social cohesion in our countries, but we also need to make sure that livelihoods are sustained for those refugees that we are in obligation to receive if we wish to continue to respect the 1951 Convention. So how do we manage this strategically and effectively? That will be a big task ahead for both the European Commission and the EU member states. We need to find ways for more post-conflict recovery. We need to find ways to enhance skills and knowledges. We need to encourage investment, and returnees require also adequate education opportunities. So this is a really vast program, but there again, the problem is that our leaders and our political, ecosystem is not really addressing refugee return and reintegration in a proper way. We are today again confronted by a more reactive approach, a closing of borders and minds. And this is, of course, extremely worrisome as we lead into the next years. So I would simply wish to say that let us remain faithful to the SDG goal of 2015, which mentioned its commitment, I quote, to leave no one behind. And in that case, we need to find in our political works, in the programs of our political parties, a more concrete way of leaving exactly no one behind. And here, well, I have in mind, obviously, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction on displaced communities, which could be an interesting channel to work upon, as we do have interesting data on this approach. And in effect, we would then be at the heart of one of the major issues that Europe has to confront in order to avoid future conflict and build resilience in face of such a major challenge. Thank you very much for those very brief remarks, which I wanted to underline with you this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Révay. And now our last speaker, actually someone representing the International Organization for Migration. I believe it is Mr. Ugochi Daniels. Is he connected?
Yes, can you hear me?
And you are Ms. Monica Goracci?
Exactly. I'm Monica Goracci. I'm the director of the Department for Migration Management at IOM headquarters, and I'm representing here today Ms. Ugochi Daniels.
Oh, Ms. Ugochi. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ugochi Daniels, our new Deputy Director General. She excuses herself, and me as well. I mean, I'm in Geneva, and I wanted to come down, but we're living in a strange world where we have in-person meetings and virtual meetings back to back now. So it doesn't give us the time to actually move to meetings because we're all on our computer, so I apologize for being here, but thank you very much for inviting IOM to this important event. We heard about the role of migrants, and I just wanted to say a few words of that. And in particular, while in the past year and a half, we have witnessed an increasing amount of solidarity and cooperation across states and private sector and public actors globally, it has unfortunately also highlighted and often exacerbated inequalities around the world. Now, for many migrants, refugees, and other people on the move, the pandemic has brought to the forefront many issues that were already pertinent to their own experience, which includes loss of jobs, social isolation, limited or lack of access to basic social services, especially healthcare. And I'm not talking about access to vaccines, which is a true problem now, but just simple healthcare. And in relation to the pandemic, migrants were also stigmatized because of their countries of origin, their perceived higher exposure to and the likelihood of transmitting the virus to others. And yet many of those countries do not have access to vaccine, isn't it contributing to inequities? But many of these stigmatizations are based actually on racial or cultural stereotypes that pre-exist the pandemic. These othering attitudes that you, Dr. Ismail, mentioned earlier, right? The othering attitudes that further aggravate the pre-existing structural inequalities and intolerance faced by migrants. And they really do question the added value of migration and multiculturalism in today's global order. And yet, migrants have outstandingly demonstrated that they are really key actors in the pandemic response and socioeconomic recovery. Migrants have been on the front lines and continue to be essential to COVID-19 pandemic response, especially in the health sector, serving as doctors and nurses. But beyond migrants' role in the COVID response and recovery, we believe it's also crucial to recognize that the diversity that migrants bring represents immense opportunities to harness progress and the sustainable development in both their origin and receiving communities. They're not just employees, migrants, they're also business owners and entrepreneurs who create new businesses and provide more economic opportunities to both migrants and native-born populations. They invest, they send their remittances and savings, often return to their countries with enhanced skills. We've spoken about return and reintegration just now, knowledge and perspective of what they learned abroad. So we do see diversity as an opportunity to advance the well-being of migrants and the prosperity of the whole of societies. So how can we then harness the value of the diversity of the multiculturalism? And we believe that we must really join efforts in promoting and implementing positive measures that address the structural discrimination and that cater for all populations, migrants and the host communities, the communities they reside in alike, through inclusive approaches without singling out the one or the other, without highlighting the specific vulnerabilities. And we must do that in all our activities and interventions. While COVID-19 certainly represents a golden opportunity in this regard, we must go beyond. And here we believe that there is another framework that we need to look at, and that's the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, the GCM, which serves as a primary framework of international cooperation on migration, and it provides really a blueprint for developing more comprehensive approach to migration in the post-pandemic economy. And the Global Compact clearly, explicitly recognizes the importance of building inclusive and non-discriminatory policies that empower both migrants and societies for full inclusion and social cohesion. As the coordinator and secretariat of the UN Migration Network, as you know, IOM has been very actively working with the core and thematic groups on tools and guidance and systems to tackle issues on migrants' inclusion in the COVID response and recovery and beyond in the other work stream. And we have an opportunity here with the upcoming first International Migration Review Forum, the IMRF, in 2022, that will bring together all adopting states and all partners to assess the progress of the GCM. And it's an important milestone and presents us a key opportunity really to address issues of social exclusion and systemic discrimination, to identify the good practices that exist and increase strategic partnerships, all with the goal of ensuring that no migrant is left behind, as also Paul Révay just recalled. So I would like to conclude just saying to all of us, let's not wait this opportunity. Let's get there prepared and work hard towards the IMRF so that none of the GCM objectives are underreported. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Monica Ugochi, Director, Department of Migration Management, the National Organization for Migration. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our many speakers on this panel. Usually the task falls to me to try to pull together what has been said by so many distinguished speakers. I will just try to highlight a few points. One, it was appropriately mentioned that if the last panel addressed the hard aspects of the existing political reality, this panel really looked at the so-called softer aspects, but in many ways, sometimes soft aspects turn out to be stronger than the hard side, which is more brittle. I would say that we had three general major points that we went through. One is the fact that human rights are fundamental to one and all, and it's in the Charter of the UN, it's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's in the preamble of UNESCO, and we discussed whether it was really a common humanity or one humanity with certain cultural manifestations among others, but without question the starting point that if you're dealing with diversity, if you're dealing with movement, you are dealing with the fact that we are all human, born equally in dignity and freedom. And it was also suggested that as we talk of biodiversity, we should talk of cultural diversity or culti diversity, whatever new word we may coin in this respect. But the fact remains, whether it was because of historical reasons, as I mentioned, or whether migration is at the heart of a lot of the movements of population, it feeds diversity, and it sometimes creates issues and tension in particular countries. It calls for efforts at integration of migrants coming into existing societies, and where a certain balance has to be found between responsibility and solidarity. But if we recognize that today we have more refugees than we've ever had since the Second World War, 80+ million people, they pose problems of movement, of potential return, of reintegration. But I think more than one person mentioned the importance of recognizing the SDG, that no one is going to be left behind. Whether or not we have a global compact for migration or coming up, what we should do, we should be fighting social exclusion and recognizing that migrants make real contributions. But that today, as we look at the world situation, yes, the pandemic and the movements of migration and refugees are highlighting and emphasizing inequalities that exist, and that according to our sustainable development path, we should be fighting to reduce. And the third part after human rights and migration is culture, and that culture can tend to be the basis for diversity, but it can also be an enormously unifying aspect. Culture, art, manifestation speaks across boundaries. And if you think, for example, of an expression of culture that is based on language, like the Arab culture or the Francophone culture or whatever, it helps overcome racism and religious differences. Not all Arabs are Muslims and not all Muslims are Arabs. The simple statement, but some Arabs are negroid like you might find in southern Sudan, but some others tend to be very blonde and blue-eyed, as you would find elsewhere. So fundamentally, I think that cultures can be unifiers. In fact, we know that after the great colonial experience of the 19th and 20th century, many of the people who sought independence in their own countries and forged their own identities actually also used languages of other countries as well. So that is also part of what we have to recognize. Peace, diversity, and our common humanity, all of that comes together in the necessity of recognizing that we are in a period of transition and that fundamentally we have an enormous obligation to those who are less fortunate than ourselves, because we, in our parts of everybody in this seminar, in our conception of our own culture, there is a profound recognition of the fundamental value of human rights and human equality. And fundamentally, I think everybody also accepts that we should leave no one behind. And so with that, I would like to thank you all for having participated in this, but I would like to extend a special thanks to our IT colleagues who worked very hard. They're not even listening to me now as I speak. My IT colleagues, including Ilaha, I wanted to express a very profound thank you to you for having fought so hard to make sure that all our panelists had a chance to participate. Thank you each and every one, and we are now adjourned.